The first thing people always forget is the color of the stage lights in that last southern winter. They do not remember the sound. They do not remember the sweat. They do not remember the fear. They remember the color, because in Montgomery, February 16th, 1977, the color was wrong. It was a heavy, nauseating yellow, like a fever dream on dimmed tungsten, like the last flicker. In a man whose body had almost stopped negotiating with the price of living. And nothing in this world prepares you for the silence, right? Before a racist sentence is whispered behind a drummer's back, nothing prepares you for what that sentence will ignite on the historical record. The final year of Elvis Presley is usually told like a post-mortem. Overdoses, painkillers, bloating, deterioration, decline. But here, in Montgomery, in this specific civic center, on this specific night, the man was still raging with a scorching interior flame. Of the strangest and most suppressed aspects of Elvis's late 70s psyche was that the closer he came to physical collapse, the more violently he defended the moral lines of the early gospel world that raised him. He grew more protective of the weak, not less, more offensive of black musicians, not less. The darker his flesh went, the brighter his righteousness burned. Some historians say that's because the morphine level in his blood was often higher in February and March than in December and January, that the analgesics made him more sensitive emotionally, not numb. But I think it was the opposite. I think he was finally telling the truth. And for years, Montgomery locals quietly whispered that this night was the last time they ever saw the old Elvis, the real one, the one whose fists balled when injustice walked in, the one who could gut a man spiritually with only a sentence. But history never documented this moment, because this wasn't Elvis, the movie star. This wasn't Elvis, the Las Vegas sequined deity. This was Elvis, the southern boy whose mama died too young, whose daddy taught him how to fear a room full of white men when they were drunk, and whose entire musical birth came from black hands and black sweat and black rhythm long before the industry cut it into platinum. Inside this first section, you are asked to step into the auditorium the exact way the audience stepped into his life on that night. And if you came here hungry for shock, remember this: this episode is not a short clip. It is not a meme. It is not a cheap viral forecast. This is a forbidden record of a night in which a single racist sentence spoken toward a drummer functioned like a match dropped inside the bloodstream of a dying king. And if, by the end of this story, you feel like you have witnessed something that should not have been hidden, if you feel like this fragment of Southern history deserved to be preserved, seal it in your heart, the way his band sealed it in theirs. Pass this story forward quietly, the way a candle is passed down a midnight church aisle. The ancient way, the word of mouth way, the way the South once communicated what the newspapers refuse to print. If you believe that stories like this are what keep the dead from being erased, you may keep listening. You may echo it later. You may pass it to another. That is how we keep a man alive in the shadows of memory. This story is a slow descent. History will not blink. Elvis's drummer, that winter, carried two kinds of fear in his body. The first was the fear of tempo, the fear of accelerating into mania, because Elvis would sometimes, in the last year, suddenly demand a new speed mid-song, and a drummer has to obey the sovereign pulse of the king. The second fear was the southern room. The southern room with alcohol, because the southern room with alcohol is not like Cleveland, nor Los Angeles, nor Lake Tahoe. In the South, and especially in Alabama, liquor awakens ghosts. Liquor awakens ancestral hatreds across the counties. Liquor makes men turn back into the worst parts of 1955 again, and that drummer knew that no matter how famous Elvis was, no matter how sacred the stage had become, Montgomery was always the capital of the Confederacy in its bones. And on that night, the Civic Center was full of white men in hunting jackets and belt buckles with Confederate motifs, and boys who grew up being told that drums were a primitive instrument of the other. Elvis walked on stage that night in a white jumpsuit whose zipper tugged slightly from swelling water weight in the abdomen, his face full but still handsome in the half-shadow, his breathing more labored than 1976. But not yet the hideous rattling of the last August, his mind, feverish, emotional, and volatile. He had been having strange, fragmentary thoughts in dressing rooms during that winter tours, muttering about God and judgment and sin and race in the same sentence, and sometimes rambling mid-conversation about how the South had changed and not changed at all. Elvis was desperate for some invisible moral reconciliation with the world, but with himself. The first half of the show went. Normally, he used humor to hold the room. He threw scarves. He teased women. He held notes too long and then laughed about it like a Southern comic who knows he's playing with the limits of his own dying diaphragm. And then there was a pause midway through a song. The drummer executed a fill, a spectacular fill, a God-born fill, the kind that only a man who has lived with gospel can execute. A white man in the fourth row leaned toward another man and spat a racist sentence into his ear. Not a slur as a bullet, but a slur as a lecture. A phrase that meant, "What is a black man doing playing the heartbeat of our white king?" And the other man laughed. The drummer saw the laugh, but he did not hear the sentence. Another band member heard it, and that band member knew instantly that if Elvis heard it, there would be an eruption. So he walked across the stage. He leaned into Elvis. He told him, "Elvis," his head very slowly. The entire auditorium felt a sudden shift of a man whose soul had been stabbed in a place no drug could numb. People later swore this moment lasted 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 17 seconds, because trauma elongates time, but tape machines do not lie. It was less than 2 seconds. Elvis heard the sentence repeated into his ear by his own musician. He did not blink, did not breathe, and then he walked forward toward the apron of the stage. And he did something almost no white Southern man with fame ever did in 1977. He defended a black man publicly in the Deep South without hesitation, without negotiation, without apology. He said, and these words have been reconstructed from multiple, independent oral testimonies. "Let me tell you something. That drummer right there is more of a man than you will ever be. And if you think I'd ever share this stage with a small-hearted coward, stand talent because of the color of his skin, you can get out right now." The room froze. Because in the South, when a white man calls out another white man for racism, It is not political. It is mortal. It is tribal war. Elvis then continued. I was raised by people who prayed with colored hands. I was raised on rhythm that came out of churches you never set foot in at. And then he stepped closer to the front row and spoke directly to the heckler, who had laughed at the racist sentence. You think you got the right to measure the worth of a man because of the bones he got from God. That rhythm on my right is the only thing keeping this show alive. Without him, I'm just a ghost in white cloth. You can see women in the front rows covering their mouths. You can see men in their seats gripping their armrests because they knew a Southern taboo had just shattered. Elvis Presley had just performed racial defiance in Montgomery. Not in New York, not in California, not in Europe, in Montgomery, in the last year of his life. And then Elvis did something even more terrifying. He turned his back on the audience. He walked toward the drummer. He put his hand on the man's shoulder, and he said audibly through the microphone 3 words that his inner circle later said were the truest words he spoke that entire cursed calendar year. Thank you, brother. Psychologically, something ancient broke in Elvis. At that exact moment, he was no longer performing. He was no longer the product. He was back in Tupelo. Small, fragile, poor, and surrounded by the black community that fed him rhythm, fed him biscuits, fed him gospel, fed him the sense of God he could never quite lose. Elvis was not defending a drummer. He was defending his own childhood. He was defending the very soil that grew his music. He was defending the sacred racial syncretism that the South tried to kill every decade, because in the South, white supremacy is not about hatred. It is about amnesia. It is about pretending the music Elvis was built from never came out of black pulpits and black prayer circles and black guitar strings on porches in the heat of Mississippi, when night was a furnace. But Elvis remembered. He could not forget, because those memories sang inside him that night. After the eruption, Elvis's performance changed. He no longer cared about the choreography. He no longer cared about the set. He was now a prophet trying to smuggle justice into a doomed world before his heart gave out. He sang like a man trying to carve a moral epitaph. Air and the room transformed. Some men lowered their eyes, some women wept, some people walked out quietly, ashamed or humiliated or stunned, and others, especially those from the black side of Montgomery, felt witnessed for the first time in their own hometown by the most famous white man on the planet. There are elderly black Alabamians who swear that this night was the first time they ever saw a white Southern celebrity defend a black Southern musician at full volume, in public, under stage light, without flinching. And that is why this story matters, because Elvis could not save himself, but for a moment he saved the truth. Every Southern tragedy has an aftershock. In March 1977, Elvis's body began slipping into chaos. He collapsed in private rooms. He fell asleep mid-sentence. He swallowed pills to escape the noise. He was dying. And there were people near him who believed that the Montgomery eruption had unlocked a vault of unresolved childhood trauma. Because after Montgomery, Elvis spoke more frequently about race, injustice, judgment, sin, sorrow, class, shame. He told a friend that he was haunted by the fact that his fame had been built in a country that still hated the origins of the music that made him. And he told another that he regretted not speaking out more in the early 60s and early 70s, when he still had the world's ear. But the Montgomery moment was the moment when the man boiled over and the Southern code was broken. Historians are afraid of this story because it contradicts the plastic narrative that Elvis was simply a thief of black culture or a passive vessel of the white entertainment machine. This Montgomery night proves that in the last year of his life, Elvis still saw color, and he saw morality, and he saw the wound, and he knew who had inflicted it. The drummer never forgot friends that he felt like Elvis had taken a bullet for him that night, that for a few minutes the world inverted and the white king defended the black soldier instead of the South demanding the black musician defend the white king. Montgomery is a cursed city, a capital of ghosts. But for one night inside that civic center, something holy cut through the yellow light. A dying man who once rode the wave of America's racial wounds to superstardom used his last remaining authority to declare that rhythm has no color, and that the men who believe it does are still living in their own damnation. Stories are buried because they threaten the official narrative. This one was buried because the man who performed it died 6 months later. Montgomery was the last time Elvis Presley stood up for the childhood truth that made him and the world looked away.